Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Make sure you download our free mobile apps available on Apple and Android. It's not very often that we hear a warning message from mainstream Christianity, especially not from the Grahams. Franklin Graham has come out and warned that Christians in America are persecuted by the LGBT agenda. Now, we've exposed Billy Graham. We exposed him like 2 or 3 years ago, a long time ago. But evangelist Franklin Graham said Tuesday that Christians in America who oppose the LGBT agenda are being persecuted and singled out, over and over and over again for acting in accordance with their biblical convictions on sexuality. And it's got to make you wonder, what in the world is being taught in American churches that more Christians aren't figuratively up in arms about what's going on with culture today? So many people are just rolling over and saying, it's okay, I accept it. It's okay, whatever. It's okay, that's love, right? God told us to love everyone. Listen, love is not tolerance. Love is not acceptance. Graham, the president of both the Billy Graham Association and the humanitarian organization of Samaritan's Purse, spoke as a guest on the Washington Watch radio program hosted by prominent social conservative activist and Family Research Council president Tony Perkins to discuss BGEA's upcoming World Summit in Defense of Persecuted Christians being held in Washington, D.C. next week. Just last night in The Wire, I asked the question, why do Americans not know how many Christians are being persecuted around the world? Just why? What are the churches teaching the congregation? What is going on? This summit, which runs from May 10th to the 13th, has been touted by Graham as the first event of its kind that will bring together over 600 people from 130 countries across the globe, many of whom will tell their own first-hand accounts of being persecuted for their faith in Christ. The conference comes as tens of thousands of Christians are killed, imprisoned, or persecuted worldwide. This is on the Christian Post. They actually need to change those numbers because the conference comes as millions of Christians are killed, imprisoned, or persecuted worldwide because of their faith every year. It's not thousands. Stop minimizing this problem. It is millions. Hundreds of millions of Christians are being persecuted around the world, are being oppressed around the world. I want our politicians to see what is happening, and I want the voices of these people who have been persecuted. I want their voices to be heard. I want to give them a stage for them to be able to tell their stories and do it right there in Washington, where hopefully we can see some policy changes, Graham said in the summit. The summit was originally scheduled to be held in Moscow, Russia, last October, but was moved and rescheduled after an anti-terrorism law was passed that severely limits freedoms of missionaries and evangelists. I'm going to play the interview because, you know what, it's kind of cool to hear that somebody else is also frustrated about the millions of Christians who are being killed worldwide. And of course, the government of the United States does not care. They've just been left to slaughter. But I'll tell you who does care. Think about how much God regards those who die for the faith. Think about how much God cares about those individuals who are being persecuted around the world. Have a listen.
From Coptic Christians in Egypt to the land of Eden, Jonah, and Daniel in Iraq, where Christians have shrunk from about 1.5 million down to less than 300,000. Christians are being persecuted at the hands of Islamic extremists at alarming rates. In response to the genocide against Christians, the World Summit in Defense of Persecuted Christians is being convened by the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, May the 10th through the 13th, here in Washington, D.C. With us now is Franklin Graham, President and CEO of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association and the International Christian Relief and Evangelism Association organization known as Samaritan's Purse. Franklin, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you, Tony.
Let's talk about this summit. First, explain the focus of the summit and why you're calling these leaders together.
It's because of what's happening at an alarming rate around the world, Tony, where thousands of Christians have been killed. The rate is around 100,000 a year are being killed just for their faith. But we're seeing entire areas of the Middle East that are being eradicated. And I was just in northern Iraq over Easter and went out to the Nineveh Plain. And the Christians that were forced off out of their villages, forced off this area of the world, are not really being invited to come back now that they've been liberated, because the government of Iraq is making a deal with the Iranians so that this land will go to the Iranians. They don't want the Christians to even come back to their homes, so they're not going to provide any services. They're not going to provide security for these Christian villages. But this is happening not just at the hands of Islam, but it's happening, we see, around the world, where Christians, where they're the minorities, where they're being persecuted. And we just want to put a spotlight on it. I want our politicians to see what's happening. And I want the voices of these people who have been persecuted. I want their voices to be heard. I want to give them a stage for them to be able to tell their stories, and do it right there in Washington, where hopefully we can see some policy changes.
Yeah, I'm not sure people realize just how significant this problem is, as you pointed out. According to the statistics compiled by the Center for the Study of Global Christianity at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, in 2016, 90,000 Christians throughout the world were killed for no other reason that they followed Jesus Christ. And that has been growing over the last few years. And you and I have talked about this several times, but I think in large part it's driven by the indifference toward religious freedom here at home is sending a message to the terrorists and the tyrants abroad that they're free to do as they please when it comes to Christians. Well,
that's true. I mean, we need to not only put a spotlight on what's happening around the world, but we need to put a spotlight on what's happening here in this country, where Christians are being persecuted, but in a different way. Like you said, it's not with a gun or a sword, but they're being forced out of businesses because they did not support the gay lesbian agenda. You take the bakers, the Kleins, who had the little bake shop out in Oregon, the family in Washington State that had the Christian pharmacy, but they refused to carry the morning after pill because they felt that was abortion. They were a Catholic family, and they lost their case before the courts. And it's over and over and over again across the country where Christians are being singled out, their businesses, because they won't support the agenda of another group of people. We need to protect that. We need to protect the Christians in this country, but abroad. And I think by putting the spotlight, Tony, it's going to help. It's not going to hurt. It's going to help get the word out and get the voices of those who have suffered to give them a platform to speak.
You're listening to Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins. Glad to have you along on this Tuesday afternoon. Franklin Graham, my guest. We're talking about a summit coming up shortly here in Washington, D.C., a summit in defense of persecuted Christians around the world. And Franklin, you're going to have about 125 Christians that have been persecuted for their faith who will be at this summit and tell their stories and share this. What do you hope will be the outcome?
Well, first of all, we need to have this administration work for legislation that will protect Christians. And this is what I hope, a religious freedom bill that will protect the Christian faith. But I want, Tony, we have 600 delegates coming, 137 countries. And then these 130 are actually people that have suffered for their faith. They've been in prison, they've been put in jail. We even have some of the family members of the martyrs of the Egyptian Coptics who had their heads cut off on that Libyan beach a few years ago and was videoed to the world. Some of their family members will be there to tell their stories. But I want people to see a face and to be able to shake hands and sit down and talk with some of these people. We have meetings up on the Hill. We have some congressmen and senators who plan to attend. We have some media people who will be attending. And we hope we'll have the ears of the administration as well.
Franklin, when you mentioned during Easter you were in northern Iraq, and as you're meeting with some of these Christians, many of them in refugee camps, trying to find safe places right now, is there a sense that America is with them, or what's the sense among Christians in these desperate situations? What are they looking for, and what do they think is coming from America?
First of all, everybody would like to be able to go home. But you have to understand, Tony, when the Christians lost their homes and the ISIS took them in of a plane without firing a shot, they came in large numbers, went right into the city. They went straight to the mosque, and they told the imams to announce over the loudspeakers for the Christians had 30 minutes to leave, or they had an hour to leave, and otherwise they would be killed. And for those that did not leave, they were killed. For those the women that could not get away, they were taken as slaves and they were raped. The people fled for their lives, left everything in their homes, only took what was on their backs. We had 30 minutes to run. And then the Muslims took their homes and took their belongings, and they pilfered these, not only the homes in Mosul, but the Christian villages between Mosul and Erbil. A number of Christian villages were ransacked. Now, talking to the Christians in these refugee camps, they all want to go home, Tony, but it was their own neighbors that came, knocked on their door and said, "You've got 30 minutes to get out of here, otherwise we're going to kill you." These are people that they had grown up with, people that they had gone over to their house and had a meal with, and then to have this type of betrayal, they said, "We will not go back. We cannot go back unless there is security. And we have protection." And right now, it doesn't look like the Iraqi government is going to do that for these people, because they don't want them to return. They want the land. They want these villages. And the Iranians, Tony, the Iranians are there to fight ISIS. There's a large Iranian army inside of Iraq fighting alongside the Iraqi army that we're supporting. And the Iranian militias that we have run into have said, "We are here to kill ISIS. And after we kill ISIS, we are going to kill Americans." And so we're just trading one form of Islamic extremism for another.
Is there a sense among our brothers and sisters in the Middle East that are being persecuted that Christians in America, once again care, or are they seeing evidence that there's been a change from the previous administration to the current one? Has that gotten to them yet?
I think there is hope because they see American soldiers on the ground in different places. They hear the aircraft. While I was in Mosul, you could hear the American fighters overhead constantly. So there is hope for the people on the ground that maybe there will be a solution. But this is going to have to be a big focal point for this administration, because the Iraqi government right now it needs to do something to protect the Christians and allow them to go back to their homes and allow them to go back to their land.
Franklin, before I let you go, let me ask you a very practical question for our listeners across the country. What do Christians in America need to do now to stand up for their persecuted brothers and sisters?
Well, I think the greatest thing we have, the greatest weapon we have in our arsenal is prayer. We need to be praying for our brothers and sisters around the world, but be praying for our president, that God would put upon his heart and give him wisdom as what executive orders and what legislation that he can work with Congress on that would help protect Christian minorities around the world. Because, we don't have to do business with these countries that persecute Christians. We don't have to give them foreign aid. There's a lot of things that we can do to bring pressure, but the greatest thing that we can do is pray, and I would encourage Christians to pray.
We are viewer-funded, so please consider subscribing to The Christian Truther. Go to christiantruther.com/info for more information.